Welcome to Lead Pods, the official leadership podcast from USMB for pastors and church leaders, where our goal is to increase our impact together.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 53 of the USMB Lead Pods. My name is Matt Ersman, and I'll be your host today for an episode that I'm really looking forward to sharing with you. We're kind of wrapping up our series as we're getting to know all the speakers who will be with us at our MB convention coming up in July. And I think this is the last episode. We have one more speaker you haven't been introduced to yet, so I'm excited to introduce you to Hillary Morgan Ferrer. She is the founder of a group called Mama Bear Apologetics, and I love Hillary's heart. So Hillary actually has a background in biology, and she started this group because she wanted to be able to do research and kind of dive deeper into topics that parents might talk about with their kids, but they feel like they don't really have the time to do the research or the background to understand some of these heavier topics. And so she did it herself. So she has a blog and a podcast called Mama Bear Apologetics, where she helps parents answer kids' tough questions about faith. And so I think it's an awesome ministry. In this episode, we talk about what apologetics is and how it relates to evangelism, since that's kind of our topic for the convention coming up here, and kind of specifically a parenting angle as well that I think will be really helpful to you. So I really enjoyed getting to know Hillary, and I think you will as well. So let's take a quick break, and then we'll get right to my conversation with Hillary Morgan Ferrer.
Deciding on the right college is a big deal. At Fresno Pacific University, they get it. They are a private, nonprofit Christian university where your academic success is their priority. The Mennonite Brethren roots run deep from the classroom to the field. Professors connect you to research and internships. Financial aid makes your education affordable, and with their 4-year guarantee, you'll graduate on time to launch your career. Visit fpu.edu for more information about their undergrad, graduate, and degree completion programs. Fresno Pacific University. Possible happens here.
All right, my friends. Well, today I'm excited to introduce you to Hillary Morgan Ferrer. She is the founder of Mama Bear Apologetics, and she calls herself the Mama Bear in Chief over there, which I love. It's a great title. So we'll get to know Hillary today. Hillary's one of our speakers at the convention, and I'm really just excited to get to know her better there and today as well. So Hillary, thank you so much for joining us today. Grateful to have your time.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yes, it's great to get to know you. So you've got a pretty big audience. You've got a podcast, a blog. You've written 2 books that I think we'll talk about a little bit here today. So for people who haven't gotten to know you yet, why don't you give us just a quick bio, anything else you want to share with us today?
I guess I grew up in a Christian family. I was saved at a very young age, and just I never had one of those radical walking away from the faith and returning to the faith. And so I always thought my testimony was boring, but I've come to realize that it's not boring. It's a very rare testimony. So I've finally gotten to the place where I really appreciate the unique walk that I've had with the Lord. So I've had a couple different careers. I've been a photographer. I was a photographer for 10 years. I was a science teacher, have my master's in biology, and still just feel like studying biology to me is like the gateway to worship. I found myself worshiping more through biology than almost anything else that I've done. So I still have a love of science, but I love studying culture and understanding kind of the psychology of what makes people either walk away from the faith or what makes them really antagonistic to the faith. So it's just, I love thinking through the big ideas and just kind of understanding how people tick in relation to the gospel.
Very cool. And Mama Bear Apologetics, so we were talking beforehand that you've just kind of got a heart for kind of reaching moms and helping them with research and things that many moms don't really have time to do with their kids. I love that. Your website says that you're all about raising kids who think critically, love biblically, and stand firm against the cultural tide. Love that. It's obviously very needed in our world today. So tell us more. How did Mama Bear Apologetics start, and what exactly is it? What all do you offer?
Yeah, so Mama Bear Apologetics kind of started when I was getting involved with a group that just did stuff with women in apologetics. And they, I kind of through a series of events became vice president of that organization. And I found out through the girl who was president at the time that there was a large demographic of women out there who would not read something unless it was by a woman for a woman. And that was just, I'd never really done ministry or women's ministry. I'd kind of always been closer with my dad, and it hadn't occurred to me. So I thought, well, good grief, like who's reaching the women? But my first immediate instinct after that is who's reaching the moms. Because one of the things that I noticed that really kind of irked me was that all the other conferences that came through churches always had childcare available. The one type of conference that I noticed for whatever reason never had childcare was apologetics conferences. And I thought moms are the ones who are getting these questions first. we need to be equipping the moms. Who is actually reaching the moms? And so through just kind of like a series of sleepless nights where I just had all these ideas, and I kept thinking, well, maybe if I can just write down my ideas, I can go to sleep. I kind of just wrote out like this, I don't even know what it was. Just, I kind of outlined the ministry there. And then I met a woman who was kind of the epitome of what I was looking for for doing. And she had been a Christian mom. I think she had done some homeschooling. They'd done a lot with their kids. She really wasn't into any of the intellectual or the academic stuff. But when her son, after college, walked away from the faith, all of a sudden she started studying philosophy. She started studying apologetics. She started studying worldview. I mean, everything. And just said to her son, when you come home, ask me whatever questions you want. If I don't have the answer, I will find the answer before your next visit. Yeah. And so she really I thought that is something that I think could really catch. Like, what is that? I was like, that's like a mama bear instinct, that it's something that she wouldn't do for herself. It's not something that she even felt was necessary for her own faith. But when she saw something that was dragging her child away from the faith, she rose up and did what came absolutely unnaturally to her. And she did it for the sake of her child. And so I thought that's like a mama bear, like Mama Bear Apologetics. We need something called Mama Bear Apologetics. So it was kind of birthed from there. And then I just tried to I never wanted it to just be me. I wanted it to be other women kind of working together. And so I grabbed a couple friends, said, hey, let's start this ministry. And it is just, I have been shocked at how much it has skyrocketed, or not skyrocketed, but like it's just caught on very quickly, a lot faster, a lot more than I was ever expecting. In our prayers at the beginning, we're like, if we only reach, 5 to 7 moms, Lord, then we're going to still do all the work for those 5 moms. But so I've just seen women be hungry for this information, and just to have it explained in a way that they can explain it to their kids. Because there's a whole there's a difference in explaining something to where you as an adult can understand something, and explaining something to where you as an adult can then explain it to a child. Absolutely. And those are different skill sets. And so that's kind of what we have aimed to do throughout the course of our ministry, is explain it in a way that a mom can explain it to her kids.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you've got this biology background that gives you some experience, some language, some education that most parents, most people don't have. Before we get too deep, I want to just talk about the word apologetics, just so we're all on the same page, we're all on the same terms. Yeah. How do you define apologetics in your ministry?
So apologetics, if I were to define it how it is in our ministry, I would say it's like we're trying to find whatever barriers there are to the gospel, to understanding Christianity, for embracing Christianity. So these barriers can come in a lot of different ways. It can come from it can come from science, where someone has said, oh, science has disproved God, or it can come from philosophy, or what we're seeing now happening. There's a barrier in the sense that people think that God's some kind of moral monster, that even his goodness is itself morally inferior to kind of this progressive culture that we have going on. So the word apologia, it's a Greek word, originally meant to give a reason, defense for something. So it's not arguing. It's not, it is an argument in the sense of you're giving reasons for why you believe something. And I would say that everybody's an apologist for something. A lot of men are apologists for, which sports team is the best, or my husband, he will argue that there's an objective standard for why certain bands are better than others. And so, women will, maybe say, oh, well, this magazine or this book or this, this author, whatever. Everybody has reasons for what they really, truly believe. But for some reason, when it comes to Christianity, we've been taught to say, oh, you just have faith. If you really had reasons, then you wouldn't have faith. And no, the more reasons you have for something, the more your faith is increased. And so if we can provide good answers and good reasons and make a case, a positive case for why Christianity is objectively true. It's not just a cultural thing that we do. It's not just what I was raised in, what works for me, or, because I'm American or whatever, but that it is objectively true and therefore should be followed and treated as if it were objectively true. The more reasons we can give for that, the greater people's faith will be.
Yeah, that's great and so important. So later in our conversation, I want to get to evangelism. That's kind of what the conference that we're going to be attending is kind of the overarching theme. But apologetics and evangelism really are pretty linked, right? So we'll dive into that. But especially since you work with so many moms, and honestly, like I'm a dad, but I feel like I'm in a very similar spot. What are some of the kind of bigger things that people have questions about, or what are some of the most common things that you're hearing people talk about? Because I think for people like me who raised in the church, I've been a Christian a long time. Apologetics, first of all, it's just kind of a scary word because it's a big word. You just find the Greek for us. But I think a lot of us feel ill-equipped to have the kind of really deep, logical, theological. We just feel ill-equipped with those kind of harder, deeper things. So what are some of the most common things that you talk to moms about?
I think that we've actually gone through a transition within the last 10 or 15 years. I would say before, probably starting, I don't know when it started, but I know like kind of when I first became aware of apologetics was probably sometime in the 80s, maybe early 90s, especially with Josh McDowell's Evidence That Demands a Verdict. Yeah. And that would be what you call evidential apologetics. And I think evidential apologetics is very important in the sense that it's going through the evidence for the objective reality that Jesus was a real person who lived in time, in history, that he died, that he was sinless, that he rose from the dead, and his resurrection makes more sense to believe than any of the other options. Like I look back at, we just did the first in a series on resurrection recently, and I went back to one of my old grad school papers, and one of the things that I kept saying is basically any other reason that someone gives for why Jesus' body was not there, and we had this transformation in the disciples, you're kind of still left with a miracle. So pick your miracle. I'm just going to pick the miracle that he raised from the dead. I'm not going to pick the miracle that people back then were so just objectively stupid that they had no idea how to get to the right tomb. I'm sorry. That's like a miraculous level of stupidity that, you know what, you might as well just believe in the miracle of the resurrection.
Right.
So that would be kind of the evidential apologetics. I'd say we're kind of moving from there. And then we kind of moved into more philosophical apologetics, things like, if God is good, then why is there evil in the world? Like, how do we rectify what we see and what we read about who God is? But I would say the thing that is happening now that has just taken this shift, even from when I've been involved in apologetics, I would say is maybe categorize it more as moral apologetics and specifically sexuality, that people are starting to question basic things like male and female and what sex was intended for, what marriage was intended for, the definition of marriage, questioning all these really foundational things. And even though we thought that this was a side issue to the gospel, what I'm discovering is marriage, family, sex, all these things were meant to point us to who God is. It's actually, it's a theology in itself of who God is, what our eternal destiny is, and what it means to be a man and mankind in right relationship with God. And that if we mess up with these really foundational things, we misunderstand who God is, what our destiny is, and who we are. And I mean, that essentially is the gospel right there. You have to have the correct identity of mankind and the correct identity of God for them to come back into right relationship. So I would say for the young kids, a lot of times it is going to be some of the more evidential, like who made God is probably one of the most common ones. Well, you know, if God made everything, well, then who made God? Well, we addressed this in our first book about how, you know, basically everybody is left with an uncreated being who's capable of creating. And whether or not you want to label that as natural laws or whatever, you're still left with the same being that you have to have faith in. Right. And so we're kind of all on the same footing there. But people always think, well, natural laws, that's more scientific than saying God. No, it's not. It's a faith statement either way. Yep. So the who made God question is always really big. There's always going to be questions about just kind of how things came to be. Like one of my nephews the other day was just asking about the concept of language. How did language come about? How did Adam even name the animals in the first place? You'll always get the one about why did God create the tree in the first place? So this theology of free will that they're wrestling with even at really young ages. And, you know, why did God create Satan? Basically, why did God choose in history to act in the way that he has? And there's an amazing book by one of my professors, Clay Jones, called Why God Allows Evil, that answers this in a way that I think is very, very sufficient and emotionally satisfying for why God did what he did. But you're seeing kids that are wrestling with these questions really early on. And I would say nowadays, it's not even in the form of questions, it's in the form of assumptions. And that would take us back to this idea of sexuality and male-female marriage, all that stuff. And if the God of the Bible did right and say sex is supposed to be between a man and a woman in marriage, covenanted for life, well, then now we're having to contend with cultures saying that God is bigoted, he's homophobic, he's transphobic, he's all these different things. He's causing harm. I would say the word harm itself. And I believe I'll be speaking on this at the conference, the concept of linguistic theft, how we're just changing the definition of words. What does it mean to be tolerant? What does it mean to love? What does it mean to hate? What is good? What is evil? What actually causes harm? All of these things, when you change the way you can even talk about God, that itself becomes a stumbling block. And so I would say that a lot of these assumptions that kids are getting through media, through music, through the schools is probably one of the biggest stumbling blocks that we have right now, because it's making God look like he himself is evil and we are morally superior. That's a problem when it comes to evangelism.
Yeah, absolutely. We probably won't get into this too much today, but I'll make sure our listeners know that your most recent book is specifically about sexuality. I know today's parents have a lot of questions, like you were just talking about with the trans and LGBTQ stuff. So I want to recommend your book, Mama Bear's Guide to Sexuality. So please do check that out. But to go back to what you're just talking about with apologetics and evangelism, as you were talking, one thing that I was thinking about, so I've got a 4-year-old daughter, and she's already asking questions that honestly, they're framed as little kid questions. But kind of like you were just talking about, they're deep questions, right?
Yeah.
Like when they ask about heaven, like she's asking me questions I don't know how to answer, or like the problem of evil. Like a little kid might ask some kind of question that's, little kid language, but it's a real big question that if we're honest, all of us have those questions too. Yeah. And so if we're kind of, just beginning to have some evangelism conversations, our non-Christian friends had those same questions too. So it's kind of interesting that as we prepare ourselves to answer our kids' questions, we're also hopefully growing in our faith and getting ourselves ready to have those conversations with adults, right? So I think it's a kind of, I love your angle of aiming towards moms, but it's something that we all need to wrestle with, right? How are apologetics and evangelism related? They kind of are very closely related, but they are different. So how does some of this translate into some of our like evangelism conversations you might have with friends and neighbors?
Yeah, I call apologetics the pre-evangelism, because it's like when you're starting with a blank slate, well, in like I think kind of in the first century church, a lot of times you were starting with a blank slate with people who already believed in a God, whether or not they believed in many gods or one God, they at least believed in some kind of supernatural. They believed that supernatural deity, whoever it was, should be obeyed, that supernatural being had some kind of laws that needed to be obeyed, and that they should submit, and they would have to basically submit themselves to that deity's authority. These are really basic things that we take for granted right now that may not necessarily be the case. I would say the concept of authority itself has been completely obliterated, starting really with postmodernism and probably beforehand, of this idea that there's any kind of authority whatsoever. And if there is authority, is it even possible for it to be good? That the idea of authority has become just this, almost synonymous with oppression and power. It's these bad things that we're supposed to fight against. So I think that we need to, when we're relating apologetics to evangelism, we're kind of we're taking the breadcrumbs back to what their initial starting assumptions are. And the more educated and intellectual society is, the more sophisticated those arguments and assumptions, we'll just say the assumptions that they've already uncritically absorbed go. And you actually have to take a step back before you can even talk about Jesus, who's God's son, who it's true that he came to save men of their sins. You might have to establish, number one, that there's a God. Number two, that Jesus existed. Number three, that we're sinners, which, I mean, like, let's look back in the 50s. People knew that they were sinners. They don't necessarily know that anymore.
Right.
Or that if the truth itself exists. This is probably one of the big things that you'll hear your kids saying, well, this is my truth, that's your truth. We didn't have that back when I was a kid. It was like you talked about the truth and you had people's opinions, and those were different. And nowadays it's like they're the same thing. Yep. So if we're trying to reach people with the truth of Jesus Christ coming to save them from their sins, who's the Son of God, we're going to have some problems if we don't understand what their assumptions are first. So that's absolutely where I think apologetics comes in handy. And it just kind of helps you. If you think about it like this, if the goal for someone is to be at my house, there's a lot of different ways they can be lost. It's the problem will always be that man is separated from God. That humans are separated from God. But I think we kind of take that as this simplistic idea of lost or saved, instead of saying there's a lot of different places they can be lost. And if we're trying to get them to a destination, i.e., salvation, we need to figure out where they're coming from first. And so putting in a lot of that pre kind of evangelism talk in order to understand where they're coming from is itself a way that we can love them. And then we have to look at the concept of what C.S. Lewis called watchful dragons. We're not in a blank slate society where they've never heard. Our problem isn't that people haven't heard. It's that they've either heard the wrong thing or they've understood it incorrectly. And so we actually have to go back and help unteach things that aren't true about God. Or if they're used to people who are so gung-ho about evangelism, who are out there and it's like every single person is just almost like, I don't want to say a notch on their belt, but it's like, there's an agenda. I just want to get you saved. They have these watchful dragons that come up that say, as soon as you start going in that direction, I'm just going to stop you there. I've heard it 1,000 times. I don't want to hear it 1,001 times. And so finding a way to kind of present some of these things in a way that kind of calms down their watchful dragons, which C.S. Lewis talked about the importance of art and storytelling, which was kind of his purpose for the Narnia series, was to kind of reimagine the story of Jesus as Aslan, this lion and stuff like that, in a way that, you know, everybody turns into a little kid with their hands under their face, just kind of listening to a cool story, and those watchful dragons just kind of calm themselves down. So yeah, I would say that's another way that apologetics and evangelism are very much linked together.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love that. And that was kind of my next question is, I know one of your things that you spend a lot of time talking about is just culture issues, right? And our culture is in a lot of ways not very open to Christianity, but in a lot of ways, people are just in general kind of open, like people are willing to have these kind of conversations. So you just hit on this a little bit, but let's just go a little bit further. So how, if people do have non-Christian friends, family, neighbors, how do you recommend we have these kind of conversations? Since it is so divisive, it's just hard to know where to start with some of this. We don't want to turn people off, like you were saying. Most people have a frame of reference for Christianity. It's probably just not very positive. So what are some kind of gentle ways that we can start having those conversations?
Well, I think probably one of the best things that you do, and this is something my dad told me when I was young, he's like, just ask someone questions about themselves and they'll walk away thinking that was the best conversation they ever had.
That's smart.
And so, he's very smart. And so I think just asking people questions about what they believe, because this kind of serves a twofold thing. Number one, they feel loved and they feel acknowledged and they feel accepted and they feel valued when you truly care how they think about things, what they think about things, what their background is. But while you're doing that, what you're doing is you're kind of creating a mental map of where are they coming from, and this idea, if they're lost, where are they coming from? And so I always like to think of it as you were trying to figure out how to love them best. That is your goal. And so you might want to know if they grew up maybe with a very legalistic church upbringing that they weren't really involved, but they just had a bunch of Bible beaters around them. You need to know that because they're going to get turned off very quickly, versus if they're coming from, somewhere overseas where Christianity was such a non-entity there, they're probably going to be fascinated about what Christians actually believe. Just like I would be fascinated maybe going to India and finding out, like, what do each of these Hindus believe? Because I know that they've got just a pantheon of thousands of gods. It's actually interesting to talk about, to figure out what they believe. So I would say paying attention to the person and knowing when they start kind of pulling back. You can see it in their body language when they're starting to get uncomfortable. You can hear when they start trying to actively maybe make assumptions about Christianity. Well, what about this? What about this? Okay, we can establish there that they have been fed kind of an antagonistic view of Christianity. And so I might need to go a little bit slower and just establish this relationship first before they feel safe kind of going into these places where maybe there could be some serious hurt. And so I'm just ultimately, I think it's just loving the person, being interested in who they are, and then finding a way to, I don't know about you, I can't not talk about God. Like he is so a part of my everyday existence, a part of my reality, that if I try to censor myself, it's I'm not being authentic. So don't censor yourself. Just talk about the things that you believe, or, oh, I prayed about this and then God did this. And, you just kind of pepper it in with your speech, because that's how I would talk to my Christian friends. So why should I censor myself talking to a non-Christian friend? And in that way, they're starting to kind of be exposed to how your faith in Jesus and with God kind of transforms your everyday life. Yeah. So I would say that that's kind of how to do it. But yeah, just really being paying attention to when they start physically drawing back, when they start getting physically uncomfortable. And I wouldn't say that's necessarily always a reason to stop, but that should always be a reason to maybe start practicing how to pray in your head while you're talking, which can itself feel like, patting your head and rubbing your tummy at the same time.
Right.
But, that's a skill I think we should all learn to do, is to learn how to pray while we're talking to someone and asking the Holy Spirit, what do I need to say here? And just kind of listening to the Holy Spirit in that instance, because he knows their heart better than we ever will.
Yeah. And that's just one of those hardest things I think about being a Christian, right? Because we're all called to evangelize. I think some people, it's not an excuse, but it seems to come really naturally to some people and really not very naturally to others. Yeah. And I feel I'm glad that at least so far I'm not in this spot. Like, I know parents whose kids just do not believe Christianity, and no matter how hard they try, they just don't. And I know that's got to be hard. And how hard do you push? How hard do you not push? And I guess I want to just go a little bit deeper into that. I don't know if you have any stories or any other examples you want to share, but like, how do we balance that where God tells us to share the word of God with our non-believing friends, but especially in our culture where it seems like the best way to do that is really slowly. Do you have any other advice, or how else can we just kind of feel the room, or, okay, this conversation is not going to work, I don't want to kill this relationship? Do you have any other thoughts on that? How do we actually do that?
I think if you really truly have a relationship with someone, that it's going to get uncomfortable sometimes. Also, one of the things that I've noticed, and I've talked to people about this, I have noticed a tendency for God to bring the same kind of demographic to people. Okay. For example, my husband is an atheist magnet. If I remember going to a church picnic once for a mega church, and we sat down, and the guy that sat next to him, who was a friend of someone else, was an agnostic and just wanted to talk philosophy. I'm like, of course you'd sit down next to that guy at the picnic. And for me personally, even back when I was a camp counselor, I had the same type of girls in my cabin every single year, which was the ones that were, had kind of been Christians, but just didn't really know how to go deeper, weren't sure if they wanted to go deeper, or kind of, just how to go deeper from where they were. And so I think sometimes that is going to be what is the journey that God took us on? That's kind of what I know. I was saved at such a young age. I don't remember a first time asking the Lord into my heart. I don't remember a first for anything. I just knew that that's who I was. And I felt called by God from a very young age. But I know a lot about what it looks like to go from a cultural Christian to a deeper, really disciple of Jesus. And so I can kind of see those things. I know there's a woman at my parents' church that no matter where she goes, she has abused women that come to her, that find her. So I would say be paying attention to maybe the demographic that the Lord is bringing to you. If you start noticing a trend, maybe that's something you want to start paying attention to. I know David Wood, who's an apologist, who is the one who led Nabil Quresh. So anyway, David Wood noticed that the Lord brought Muslims in his life a lot. And so that's kind of what he studied. So I think if you pay attention to who the Lord is bringing into your life, it's going to kind of show you maybe where to spend your time. But always know there's been those couple of times, even though I do not have the gift of evangelism, that I've just kind of gone out on a limb and said, hey, you want me to explain this to you? So you just kind of have to be comfortable with the uncomfortable and be willing to kind of make it weird sometimes, and then joke about, okay, I made it weird. Okay, we can keep going watching the movie or whatever. And so I think people are so afraid of those uncomfortable moments that they don't know how they think that they can't recover from them. And you absolutely can. Yeah,
that's good. Yeah, I agree. And it's kind of funny. We'll shift gears a little bit, but really, I think it is a very similar conversation going back to parenting a little bit. So in this culture that we're all in, what are some other things that you do specifically for parents when the culture does tend to tell us that, Christianity is wrong, or I think you mentioned earlier that God is sometimes causing harm? What other kind of language do you use for parents to talk to their kids about some of this stuff, especially in the kind of crucial elementary teen years? What advice do you have for parents?
Yeah, I think sometimes you need to look to see where if you have a child that is really pushing against like anything Christian, I think there's a couple of things you need to take into account. Is it their own hurt that is like pushing them away, or is it someone that they know? A friend that they know. I would say the LGBT thing would be huge right now, because we'll have these, maybe middle school, high school kids who have a friend that, claims to be under the banner of LGBT. And because of what they heard about, Christians hate these people, that's who they're protecting. I would say also know your child's personality. I kind of keep it simple. I say we got our thinkers, feelers, and doers. That the thinkers, when they're asking questions, it might feel to like if you have a feeler parent with a thinker child, it's going to seem to them like the kid is just making excuses and always just asking difficult questions because they're trying to be obnoxious.
Yeah.
I was a thinker kid, thankfully, with a thinker parent, my father. And so he kind of had fun with that with me. But if you have, let's say, like a real feeler kid, they need to understand or you should probably look into, is there some kind of hurt that they've experienced that is pushing them away? Because usually very young kids are not going to have this absolute push. They may have something like, there was a Sunday school teacher who was really mean to them. I don't know if you know, Lisa Childers, a friend of mine, she had a second grade teacher that just scared the bleepity bleep out of all of them and talking about hell. And so it's kind of, a lot of times kids will react to things that have a different root cause. And it's almost like a detective game trying to find what the actual root cause of that is. And then finally, I don't want to overemphasize this, but I don't want to leave this out of the conversation. I do believe that we are having spiritual battle that is starting to get more overt than we've seen in the past in America. And so I think it's good to recognize when you have the symptoms of something spiritual that's going on. For example, I won't say who it is. There's a child in my life that his mother was telling me that she can't even say the name Jesus because he will say, you can't say that name. You can't say that name. And I remember being on a Zoom call with them and I just thought, I'm going to test this out. And I just started saying a couple of things about God. And I watched him physically curl up into a ball and start rocking himself. Wow. That is not normal. That is a sign that there is possibly something spiritual going on. And like I said, we don't want to overemphasize this, but we can't ignore this either. So at that point, kind of asking the child, what are you feeling when I say this? Kind of exploring why they're pushing away so much. And sometimes you need to go to some other pastors and get some help that is stuff that's a little too deep for maybe you to deal with on your own.
Yeah, man, that's crazy. It gets into some deep stuff quickly with that kind of stuff. So
yeah, but it does happen. It's not always the case, but I've seen it enough to where I'm like, that's different than just a kid that just kind of doesn't want to talk about things.
Right. And you're wise to be attuned to that. That's important. At least one more thing I want to hear you talk about. So especially with apologetics, again, this depends on personality. It depends on all kinds of things. But if we're getting into the kind of the facts and it is an argument. We hopefully won't get to like argumentative. Yeah. But
very different.
I don't know if you've noticed this or if you agree with this, but I feel like in the past, decade or whatever, as American politics have become so divisive, for me, it's hard to it seems like faith has also become divisive because with politics, everyone's telling us what to do, what to think, and it's so black and white and it's so this side versus that side. For me, I sometimes struggle to share my faith in a way that doesn't feel politically divisive, right? Yeah. So even if we are getting into facts or C.S. Lewis debates or arguments or whatever, like we have to do it lovingly, right? That has to be an element to the equation or it's not going to get anywhere. So how do you work that into some of the conversations you've had or your books, your articles, your podcasts? Like that's a big part of this too, right? Is the relationship. And if they say no, okay, I'm still going to be your friend. Like, can you kind of share your thoughts on that a little bit?
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right that there's the kind of people have started to fuse this concept of Christian and certain political parties. And I think that itself is dangerous because you're hitching your wagon to something that may not necessarily be indicative of who Jesus is. I think sometimes in certain areas, the Lord gives us different convictions. It's not necessarily right or wrong. He gives us different convictions because there's a certain way he wants us to serve and a certain way that he wants to use us in different people's relationships. Now, there are absolutes, absolutely. If something is absolutely against, like I will say abortion is absolutely not one of those things I think that we can compromise on because I think that is absolutely a moral issue. But when it comes to the political gamut, to try to separate those as much as possible, I would say also asking questions, keeping the main thing, and just asking someone, so who were you brought up to believe Jesus was, or who do you think Jesus is? I get these conversations all the time on funny enough, on Instagram. Instagram's like the only place I really kind of interact. Our team has the different social medias kind of divvied up so that we don't have to all, and God bless Amy, who's willing to be in the wasteland of Twitter. I just refuse to go there anymore. But yeah, so you'll find people who just have this absolutely wrong idea of who Jesus is, and it's been attached to political things.
Yeah.
I see this happen both on the left and the right. I would say the person that I was interacting recently, it'd probably be more on the left in the sense that Jesus came to free the oppressed. And so we need to find who the oppressed are. It's like, no, Jesus came to save sinners. There's a difference. So separating those two, but just asking, I think whenever you're not clear about something, how are they defining Jesus? How are they defining love? How are they defining justice? How are they defining what Jesus is called? Like, why did he came? Why did he die? Because there are certain, like within progressive Christianity, they're going to say that Jesus came to free the oppressed and to show what it looks like to love even unto death. And they deny the substitutionary atonement of Christ's blood for our sins. That's a big difference in our understanding. So again, when we're talking about building these relationships, you want to know where they are. And so I think this is where a lot of people don't quite understand how to find, okay, there's a disagreement, and they'll see it on the surface level. You got to kind of dig down beneath. There's usually a difference that's on a more ideological level where you can start asking them questions about what they believe. And that's what I did in this most recent thing on Twitter. I was like, what do you believe the Bible teaches about why Jesus came? And just finding out what they actually believe. And it's going to tell you a lot more. And sometimes you're just going to say, holy cow, I did not know that that's what they believed about Jesus, or that's what they believed about God, or that's what they believed about sin, or, those things. But again, absolutely dividing it from, I think Christian culture is really important, because there's a lot of things culturally that have been, even that word evangelical, that we're seeing this huge boom in the popularity of what's called deconstructing your faith, trying to separate it from whatever the culture was that you were brought up in. Find out what those things are. What things about Christianity do you think were absolutely horrible, or things that you just can't handle? And sometimes they might say something that is actually true. Like, they cannot handle the concept of hell. I remember my professor, Clay Jones, having someone say, I just don't feel comfortable with the theology of hell. And he looked at them, he says, you're not supposed to feel comfortable with the theology of hell. If you feel comfortable with the theology of hell, you don't understand hell.
Right.
So it's like they sometimes may actually hit upon a thing that's, an exclusive principle of Christianity, or what Christianity teaches about sexuality and marriage, or about, different things. They may hit something true, and that's something we can't soft pedal that. We are not God's PR department. We can't make it easier. But we can get past some of those things and maybe find some of the things that they have misunderstood. Because sometimes it will be misunderstandings. Like, God commands, it says that women aren't to speak in the church. It means I have to go in there and be silent. I can't even shush my kid. Is that true? It's like, well, let's talk about that a little bit. Right. If that's who you believe God is, then maybe we should unpack that a little bit.
Yeah. Good. That's really good. Okay. Well, Hillary, our time's going really quickly here. I want to spend our last few minutes together. Again, I'm looking forward to hearing more from you at the convention. I just want to give you a couple minutes. Tell us about your books, your podcast. If people are kind of interested in what you're doing, and they, especially from a parenting angle, that's kind of where your specialty is. So we're going to learn more about you and what you're doing, and how can we kind of follow up on this conversation?
Absolutely. So our website is Mama Bear Apologetics. And now I've had all sorts of goofy spellings of mama. It's MAMA. So just so people know, MAMA Bear Apologetics.com. We have a podcast. We have a blog. We've recently started doing video versions of our podcast, so you can find it on YouTube. And our books, the first one is Mama Bear Apologetics, Empowering Your Kids to Challenge Cultural Lies. And so that was done with a team of mama bears. And one of the things that I really wanted to do with that book, so I wrote about half of it, and then I kind of edited the other half, is I wanted to look at the questions that kids were coming up with. And like I said, sometimes there's a deeper root underneath that. So what we did is we said, what is the root that's causing that question? Because you can answer the question, but if you don't understand like the root cause of that question, it's like playing whack-a-mole. One problem comes up and you smack it down. Another one comes up and you smack it down. Right. So let's look at maybe some of the ideologies that are underneath those. And so we go through things like naturalism, postmodernism, feminism, Marxism, pluralism, moral relativism, all we call them the isms chapters. in progressive Christianity. So that would be the first book. And then the second book was written by me and contributed also by one of our other Mama Bears, Amy Davison. And it's all on sexuality. And so the first third of that book is really going into, number one, a biblical view of sexuality that goes beyond just saying, well, this is what God said, so this is what we have to do. Because that's just like this lifeless, relationshipless, meaningless rule that, and if it's a kid like me who just wants to understand how these things fit together and why, just saying because God said so, I mean, that's you got to have a healthy understanding of authority. Luckily, I have a healthy understanding of authority because my dad was awesome and my husband's awesome. So we go into kind of the theology of that. And then we go into how sometimes when people who believe differently from us, it's not that they're trying to be rebellious against God. It's that they've been taken captive by bad ideas and they are being held captive. How can we free them from these bad ideas? So that would be the first third, is just that biblical basis. The second third is what the heck is going on in schools, and why do we have these kids that grew up in the church who have been, the going to Awana and memorizing verses since they were little, all of a sudden coming out as non-binary and bisexual, because this is a big thing that's happening with children's youth. They're coming out as agender or non-binary, some form on the LGBT spectrum. Like, what is going on? And then finally, we get to things that are kind of tripping everybody up, namely pornography, same-sex attraction, the gender issue, and then looking at some of the things that happened in purity culture and what went wrong and what we had intended to do. There was all this good that we intended to do, but we kind of, again, we tack things on that were not necessarily biblical. We made like someone's salvation and their virginity like, well, those two are the same thing. Your godliness is proof by, how virginal you are. And that leaves out so much of the gospel. So anyway, we go through those different things. So those are our two books that we have out. We have a study guide for the first one, and we have a study guide that's a discipleship workbook that will be released in the fall for the second one. Yeah, and so just find us on, Apple, iTunes, all the different places where you can find podcasts, and then on YouTube if you want to watch the conversation.
Awesome. Very good. Hillary, this is important work, so thank you to you and your team for all the work that you're doing. It's been great getting to know you. I'm excited to have you at the convention. You're one of the rare non-MBs who are coming, which is great. We're excited to get to know you and introduce you to our church family. So thank you so much for your time. We'll look forward to seeing you in July. Thanks a lot, Hillary.
Okay, sounds great. Thanks.
You are invited to join the U.S. Mennonite Brethren family for USMB Gathering 2022 this July in Independence, Missouri, near Kansas City. You will enjoy staying at the Stony Creek Hotel, which is nestled in a small oasis with a lake, waterfall, park, and walking trails. The theme is Increasing Impact, with a focus on evangelism and reaching the lost as we strive to make a real difference for Jesus in our communities, nation, and the world. Make plans now to attend the biennial National Pastors Conference for Pastors and Spouses July 26th through the 28th, and the National Convention for Everyone July 28th through the 30th. Register today at www.usmb.org.
Well, once again, many thanks to Hillary for joining us today, and I encourage you, especially if you're a mom listening, and if you enjoyed Hillary today, which I'm sure you did, you can learn a lot more by going to mamabearapologetics.com or search for them on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts, and they've got a lot of great resources that I think you will enjoy. So, Hillary, thank you again so much for your time today. I look forward to hearing more at the convention. And thank you to you. Thank you again, as always, for listening. We love having our friends across the country listening to this podcast, so thanks so much for listening. And we would love your help spreading the word. So if you could either leave a review for us wherever you're listening or share the word on social media or email, however you communicate, we'd love your help to spread the word about the show. So have a great rest of your week. And in the meantime, I'll look forward to seeing you next time right here on the Lead Pods.
Thanks for listening to Lead Pods. Make sure you don't miss an episode by subscribing to our show wherever you're listening today. Learn more by visiting usmb.org, and be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We'll see you next time as we learn more practical tools to increase our impact together.